Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Welcome to Living the Wildlife. I'm Stephen Vantassel, owner of Wildlife Control Consultant. Living the Wildlife is part of the Pest Geek podcast family, and our podcast is dedicated to research-based information on all things related to wildlife damage management. We are beginning part 3 of our marathon interview with Mr. Dillingham, owner of Avitrol Corporation, which is a pesticide company that provides a chemical frightening product to manage pest birds. So if you're just starting with us, welcome. We hope you're going to enjoy the show, but do know that there are 2 other videos that you have missed if you've gotten here, because this is part 3. It was an hour-and-a-half interview that he gave to us, and we're really grateful for it. So if you're wanting to learn more about how to use Avitrol and maybe make that part of your business or solve a particular pest bird problem that you have, definitely check out this series of videos. If you have questions, comments, criticisms, yes, or perhaps you even want to be on the show, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Yes, even the criticisms, you can send those along as well. Perhaps you have an idea for the show. Would love to hear that. We want to be relevant to those of you in the industry. But our podcast, though, to be fair, we do delve into some pretty geeky stuff. This is not about where do you put the particular trap to catch that squirrel. We get into things, as important as that is, we get into things that are a lot more technical and detailed that take a lot more depth. So, but which is fine. But nevertheless, we hope you enjoy this in-depth conversation that we had with Mr. Dillingham. Stay tuned for part 3.
Way for lots of different situations. As we know that, like, if generally speaking, like if you're working with us, like the template that you're going to be provided is a 1 to 40 template. Again, we set that goal on reduction of the amount of active that being sold, and we've achieved that. I do think, however, like, U.S. Fish and Wildlife probably has some things to figure out in terms of overall population control and the methods in which we as a country want to walk down to do that. Something does need to be done. There's no doubt about it at all whatsoever. Someone is going to have to be willing to sort of wade into the swamp a little bit. And
yeah, without a doubt.
But,
and it is hard. I think you're absolutely right in terms of the social mores, and there's, it's also political, which is just a reflection of the culture, without a doubt. But there's certainly a need, and I just want to remind, we haven't really mentioned it, but can we just tick off the species of birds that are listed on the label? So
yeah.
we're not doing robins here, folks. Okay, it's not like these are a lot of these are non-native birds that don't belong in the U.S. anyway. So let's go down that list of species that are on your label.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. I do want to address the secondary question there too.
Yeah.
So it's 15 different bird species that are on the label. Of course, there's the big 3: pigeons, sparrows, starlings. Those 3 birds are native to Europe, and so there is no type of federal protection for those birds at all. So if you've heard something like that, it's a misnomer, like that's misinformation. And then from there, the additional species are birds that are known to commit depredation. So that's all basically, if I remember correctly, that's all species of grackle. So bird-tailed, great-tailed, and common grackle are on there. The brewer's blackbird, the red-winged blackbird, the rusty blackbird, and the yellow-headed blackbird are all on the label as well.
And when
So
did those get added? Were they always on the label, or were those added since your tenure as owner?
we inherited those birds
Oh, you
being
did? Okay.
on
So
the
I
label.
so that simply slipped my mind back then. So I thought I was wondering if those got added to the label. So that was my mistake. Okay. So it's a
Yeah,
pretty broad list. So you have your ag type birds as well as your urban birds. So this is an equal opportunity product, folks, for both us
yep.
rural folks and for your urban folks and everyone in between. So you have some options here.
Yeah, and I'd say too, like we do help teams with the permitting side. Like if you're starting to get into like seagulls, for instance, that is also something that we'll wade into. We did years ago used to have a product specifically for seagulls. The guys who remember kind of the good old days, it was the powder mix.
Oh,
Uh,
no kidding.
oh yeah, like it was. So that product was so our current product is at most 1% active. So regular strength is 0.5%, double strength is 1%.
Yeah.
That product was I think it was 20%.
Oh, oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
so if you
right.
didn't mix that right, things were
Oh
really
man.
things were really happening.
Oh, I've got stories, man. I've got stories that guys have told me from the good
Whew.
old days. And so there's the reason, like we used to get asked about, are you guys going to bring that one back? And we
Oh,
would be like,
no,
absolutely not. We are
not.
not,
I'd
we're not walking down that road.
there would have to be an apocalypse to bring that back.
Yeah, right. Like, oh my God. Um,
Oh
but
gosh, yeah, that's just oh my word. I didn't yes. So okay, outstanding. So let's address that secondary poisoning
yeah,
concern
absolutely.
that people may have if they're using this product. How do we address that, or to what
Yeah.
extent is
Yeah. And it's a valid concern in the light of just general pesticides. Like I think
there?
we're used to pesticides causing secondary. That's just what, it's like, okay, if
Mhm.
it's a pesticide, and something eats a rat, then that thing's gonna die, and the thing that eats that dies, and the thing that,
Right.
I think rodenticides are actually probably the main reason why we're so used to secondary.
Absolutely.
It's pretty common to like it's like somebody puts out mass bed in their house or whatever it
Hmm.
is, right? It's like, so we
It's a big
see it,
problem.
so we kind of yeah. But with Avitrol, there's actually no. We've got scientific study on this, in addition to field testing. But there's no secondary poisoning, no true secondary poisoning with Avitrol. And by the way, like I want to be clear so that people know, because people do get mixed up between
Mhm.
secondary and primary poisoning.
Yeah.
Secondary poisoning is where there's something that has fully metabolized the thing that it ate, and then something comes along and eats that thing and dies because that thing is in the system of the thing that it ate. That's what true secondary poisoning is. Birds very quickly metabolize the active in Avitrol, and like I said before, there's not a whole lot of active in it in the
Mhm.
first. And so because of those two factors, if something comes along and eats, that bird that has fallen, got an overdose or something like that, that thing will be just fine. Primary poisoning would be if that same dog now somehow got access to a baiting tray and started feeding on it. And so, by the way, I want to make sure that all the listeners know too, as these treatments are happening, this bait is generally elevated. We're
Yeah.
talking roof level baiting and all sorts of stuff. So the trays that we use are specialized, all sorts of things that are in place to make sure that primary poisoning doesn't happen. And then the labels also got parameters to make sure too that, like, birds, particularly grain feeding non-targets, aren't actually in
Yeah.
there during the treatment process. That's actually one of the questions that we ask, as guys are checking into the site
Yep.
and they're looking at things and doing all that kind of stuff. Did you observe any non-target, any grain feeding non-targets? Did you observe them feeding on the bait? Right, two
Do
separate
you
questions.
do you recommend trail cameras? I mean, now that we have so many electronic
Mhm.
monitoring type devices,
Yep.
it's expensive for someone to, personally monitor a pre-bait station.
Yep.
Uh, I don't recall if the label requires you to stay on site when you're using the active or not, but I mean, I'm a nervous Nelly, but I would probably want to just hang around just in case. But nevertheless, but would you does someone using a trail camera or some sort of electronic monitoring device to see if there are non-targets feeding on that pre-bait?
Yeah.
Does that is that something your company recommends
Yeah,
as a way
that's
to?
absolutely something that they can do. It gives them eyes, when they wouldn't normally have eyes on.
Mm,
And time between the pre-baiting processes is longer on
yeah,
those stops than than other parts of the process, right? Um, so yeah, we've had guys that'll do that, and that works just fine. In fact, actually, there's one case I'm thinking of where we actually spotted, I think it was like a species of finch that we're getting in there and actively feeding. We're able to switch out the type of bait that was being used
yeah.
to something larger, so that they couldn't actually
Like
consume it.
swallow it. Yeah.
So that can come in handy. What I would be paying attention to, like if I'm the operator, I would be paying attention to the surroundings. Like in that situation I just mentioned, there was a large public park like right next door, and it was known for having all sorts of species of birds. So when we put out all of these trays, it pulled those birds in that direction basically. So that's something to think about. That could have been avoided actually with just a little bit more observation on the fronts, like during survey,
Yep.
prior to pre-baiting, right? Like so that's something that could happen. The other thing too, that is one of the misconceptions is that you've got to stay on site during active baiting. By the way,
Yeah. Right.
to your point earlier.
Yeah.
And you don't per the label. Only time you have to stay on site is if it's on the ground and in an area accessible to the public. One of
Ah.
the
Okay. All right.
But in a sensitive site or a site where there are people around, one of the things that we recommend and one of the things that our operators like a lot is overnight rotation. So that's something where birds don't feed when they roost overnight. And usually right around sunset is about when birds are going to start settling down to start roosting.
Mm,
So a popular method might be I rotate in the evening. Let's say sunset is at 6 p.m. I put my active bait down at, let's say, 6:30 p.m. And then I rotate back in the next morning, let's say before store hours, 7:30, 8 a.m. or something like that. And I remove that active bait and replace it with live bait. And you can do rotations like that. They're perfectly safe. And
so you're getting those birds when they're coming off the roost and feeding immediately, and then you can remove that active and then replace it with your
Yep.
pre-bait again, and just keep to see if they're, because if that you had a good treatment, then you're basically done. If you're not, well, then you kept them feeding and you just go
Yep.
out with another tray again. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that ensures that bait is just not sitting out there days at a time. I want to make
Right.
sure guys know that too. Like a 1 to 40 dilution ratio doesn't make up for like overexposure. So what you can't do is just come out and live bait and leave it out there for like a week and expect all the bird has been feeding on is like active bait. Like you will expect to see more mortality than if you did an overnight rotation. Right? Like that's
Yeah.
their diet is a pesticide. That's probably not going
Yeah.
to work super well. Um,
So on the secondary poisoning issue, and that let's this would be, is there concern about, you talked about that the product is metabolized by the bird. What about the kernels that might be in the crop of the bird and not
mhm,
necessarily metabolized?
mhm.
Is Avitrol a weight-based ingredient? In other words, the volume needed
Right.
to affect, a dachshund would be a
Yep.
lot less than needed a Great Dane, right? So,
You're right.
what kind of concern would that be for uh, animals eating the crop of two or
Yep.
three pigeons or something?
Yes, so we do have studies on this. It is an LD50 product, and we have all those studies there
Hmm.
available on that. And of course, any of the studies I've referenced, if someone wants access to them, again, they could email that same support at avitrol.com. We're more than happy to provide that.
Nice.
Um, but as far as like eating the crop goes, um, it is possible that something could get, that's called primary poisoning because they're
Yep.
directly eating the kernels, if they did that. The best way to avoid situations like that from happening just so happens to also be the overnight rotation, or an early rotation that I mentioned. So here's the thing, just like taking a medicine on an empty stomach, if you can get the birds around that first and second feeding, you get immediate grounded reaction. And what you don't have to deal with is birds traveling somewhere, falling somewhere, whatever it is, right? Where you don't have access to them or don't see them or something like that. So if there happens to be, a bird that expires and there's, maybe something in its crop or something like that, right? Um, the ideal place for that to happen is actually at the place where you're feeding it, right? Like directly. So if it's on the rooftop, like I want that to happen on the rooftop, right? And that is very possible, again, to get that predictable result. But knowing that birds are going to feed around daybreak or so, which is going to be somewhere around 5 or so in the morning, allows me to go, okay, great. Like, how can I make sure I get them during their first feeding? An overnight rotation is really great for something like that, where you could rotate in really early in the morning, put that active bait down, circle back like within a few hours and move that active bait. That's a great way to control the amount of time that there's exposure. And if you're thinking like, that sounds like a lot of work or whatever it is, listen, like build that into your proposals, right? It's not like you're showing up to that location for free.
Mhm.
And that's what the teams that we've seen be successful monetarily, that's what they're doing. They're building that extra time in. In fact, honestly, that's where I've seen more mistakes made, as well, is with someone over promising something and under delivering. Now all of a sudden they're panicked, they're over their timeline, they're trying to get something done fast or whatever, right? And then all of a sudden they create all sorts of incidents downline.
Yeah.
Um, and so again, this is why I said earlier, to reiterate, that this process is a system. And just to remind guys, like, businesses run on systems. Like, if you are building a business, you're building an engine and it runs on systems.
Right.
And this is meant to be a part of that engine. You want to plug a system in there. You don't want to plug a product in
Yeah, and so there's plenty of resources, of course, at the avitrol.com website, and that your company through, so I'm going to put another plug in for it, support at Avitrol, Avitrol
there. Right.
.com,
Yep.
Avitrol, just like spelled like it sounds, folks. Support at Avitrol.com. So there are a lot of resources available. So if you have any type of an interest in this type of work, even if you're not planning on doing it yourself,
Mhm.
it, take a little time, check it out. You might change your mind. You might be able to get some work doing the pre-baiting type stuff. So the time to do this is before the client calls, folks. And I know things are getting
Yeah.
busy for many of you coming up here into the spring, but you want to at least have this in your back pocket because everyone needs another revenue stream to be sure, in another
Yep.
tool in the toolbox to
Yep.
solve certain problems. And
Absolutely.
so this gives you options
Mhm.
for your clients that you may want to investigate certainly more.
Okay.
Anything that we haven't covered about Avitrol, because we've gone into a lot of different directions. We talked about sales, we talked about the various myths with the product, we've
Mhm.
talked about how people can strategize and get more additional training and the support that your company provides for it. Uh, what are anything that we haven't talked about that you're like, I want to be sure that the listener takes away before we close out today?
Yeah. I think, understanding that there's no silver bullet for birds, in general, right? And I could actually probably say the same thing with pest in general. That there's probably not a silver bullet for any particular pest problem, but there are, both effective and ineffective solutions, and that's really it. That's a thing to keep in mind. Um, all the manufacturers honestly have great support, right? Like, reach out, leverage that support. That matters. Know too, like, that this tool can be used alongside other methods as well. So it's not like you have to pick and choose per se. If you
Yeah.
decide that, hey, I want to go with an exclusion program or something like that, it's like, to me, it makes perfect sense to add your recurring onto that. You could sell, a net and spike or net and slope, program or something like that. And then also sell a monitoring program on top of it, right, to have your recurring revenue in there, as well. So now it's like you've got your regular, quarterly or biannual inspections on your install, plus you've got your monitoring program in place, right? And you can really put together a comprehensive bird program that way, depending on the client's budget. So there's a lot of flexibility and leeway, here. But I would say, guys, like, I mean, remember, the thing that you got into when you got into the thing, um, it wasn't super scientific usually the way that you got into it. Like an opportunity kind of presented itself, and you were like, yeah, like I'm pretty sure I can do that or whatever. I've
That's
been working
right.
for this company doing that thing. I'm going to go out on my own and do that or
Yeah,
whatever it is, right?
yeah.
It's like, so all that's being presented right now, like if you're not doing it, is an opportunity. And it's like you don't have to go through the scientific method to actually, figure it out. It's like
That's right.
we let us handle the scientific method part of it.
That's right.
Say yes, and we'll work
It's a
out.
lot easier than hanging net. So, as important as netting is, I'm not bashing netting, folks.
Yeah,
Netting has definitely a place to play, but
yeah,
if as entry work goes, it's a whole lot easier putting bait in a tray and sitting around and monitoring than having to be up on a 40-foot ladder putting up netting or something.
yes. I mean,
That's just me.
no, no, you're right. Much less tired arms. But no, I mean, we have manufactured everything over the years. I mean, Avitrol, has been around since, I mean, the original, stuff on it was formed in the 60s. It's been around longer than pretty much anything else that's out there
Yeah,
in
it's been a long
bird.
time.
I mean,
Yeah.
over the years, man, like actually manufactured net. We've manufactured spike. We actually offered methylene based options.
Oh,
Um,
really?
we,
Okay.
we oh,
Wow.
yeah, we were first to market with a sterilant for birds. Way ahead of its time. Back in like the late 70s or
Oh
so,
my
it paved the
gosh.
way for the current sterilant. So we've been in and sold most everything in bird. We've seen a lot of solutions. The reason why we've landed on this one is it seems to cover the most ground overall over the things that we've offered over time. And of course, we're always on the hunt looking for, there are other, products I won't talk about right now that we've
Yeah.
got in development and other lines, even other, other vertebrate wildlife that we may be getting into
Well,
as
good.
well in the near
Good.
future that we're working
Because
on.
we really need more companies to try to innovate. And I've been very pleased with the way the industry has innovated since 2000. I think 2000, I'm going to call that a
Yeah.
tipping point just because it's an easy number.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to traps and things, a lot of little nuanced things, just different designs that really help with efficiency.
Mhm.
But we have been sort of lacking on the pesticide side, for good reason. It's expensive, right? I mean, that's just, let's be honest, it's extraordinarily expensive to get a
Yep.
product registered and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But I I am glad. I do hope that you guys can come up with something. Other companies, if you're listening, we desperately need additional tools because it's getting more and more complex,
Yeah.
both on the trapping end. I mean, states are banning types of traps and things. It's getting tough. So
Yeah.
we really need something out there. So I'm really glad to have you come. And I just came up with another question, and I
Okay.
just want to hit you with, and that is, how would you compare? I don't need you to go into prices. We're trying to just see the ratio
Yeah.
of an exclusion job. If I'm dealing with building X
Hmm.
and it costs me, I'm just going to throw a number out. If it costs me $1,000 to do exclusion on that building, just
Uh-huh.
say it's a little house or something.
Yeah.
In comparison, or a 1,000x, what would it cost? How is Avitrol comparison in terms of that cost? Because
Yeah.
that's one of the things that sometimes
Hmm.
a business would rather have a small fee that they can do every year if
Yep.
necessary, if
Yep.
it came to that, rather than a large chunk of money to put into a netting job.
Yep. Yep.
And so can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the relationship of the pricing? Is it 10%? Is it
Yeah.
20%? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing is I think inside the question is uh it's like the ratio of cost to objective, right?
Right, right, right.
Um, so if the objective is to move the birds from the location, right, create a bird-free zone, that's really the apples to apples cost that we're looking to compare. And that's really what your customer is actually asking you for, regardless of maybe what they say. They might say, "Oh, birds are getting in the warehouse, and it's really frustrating," or whatever. It's like, well, the birds in the warehouse are just spillover from all the birds that are on the outside of the warehouse,
Outside.
which is a lot more of them, right?
That's
It's like,
right.
why don't we take care of all of it and create a bird-free zone, and then you don't have to
Right.
worry about this problem anymore. Um, and so, what I have seen some companies do is sort of piecemeal some stuff for customers that doesn't actually create the end objective that they're looking for.
Mhm.
Um, it just sort of, so it's like, hey, here's the end objective. Let me create a bird-free zone, and let's say I'm going to come through and I'm going to exclude and do all this stuff or whatever. Well, it's like, okay, to keep birds out of here altogether, it's going to be, $150,000 or whatever, right? And the customer's like, we
Uh,
didn't put that in our budget this year,
right.
right?
Like who has 150 grand burning a hole in their
Yeah,
pocket,
just
right?
sitting
just
around,
just
just
sitting around, just
rainy day fun bird project.
that's right.
It's like great.
For,
Like
for
this
bird
is
control.
yeah, like this is going to take 3 years by committee to go through. It's going
That's
to
right.
right? Whereas now if it's like, okay, great, if we're trying to create a bird-free zone and you compare apples to apples, that same job that might be $150,000 probably going to be like $10,000, for a treatment like this. Plus, you get to set up your recurring. Plus, the smart guys there, especially if they're creating a side-by-side bid, where they've already seen the 150 grand, they might actually up that a little bit and give themselves a little more margin. Maybe I'm going
Yeah,
to charge 20,000 for it, or 30,000 or something because I've just given them a massive discount is what it looks like on
yeah.
paper. But with Avitrol, typically you get about a quarter mile of repelling. So it's not like I almost call like some of the exclusion stuff like a sniper rifle solution, and Avitrol is a little more of a shotgun solution,
Okay.
right? Where it's like, okay, with a sniper rifle, I have to have a very specific target. I have to aim here and hit here, right? With Avitrol, because you generally get a quarter mile of coverage, like I can actually treat the roof, and that's going to take care of the beams on the inside of the building. It's going to take care of the sign out there by the access road, the parking lot lights, the dumpster, the pallets in the back. It's going to take care of like the whole thing, generally speaking. And so that's really the cost comparison, is what is the cost to truly solve the problem and not shuffle the problem from one area of a facility to another area of a facility, or do it and then hope that it solves the problem. I have seen this happen. I've seen bird divisions for large companies do this, and actually there are not very many things that that get me going much. I'm a pretty rock solid guy where I don't get angry really easily, but like things where I look at a business practice and I'm like, I don't know if that is actually moral. That kind of stuff gets me.
That's
Um,
right.
and
Yeah.
and so what I'll see happen is I'll see these guys sell six-figure contracts, and they'll come in and they'll install all this stuff, right, for this company, and the birds will move from position A to position B. And now in position B, they can't do anything about it, or they're going to try and come back to the customer and ask for more money,
Money.
right? And then here's what they'll do. Here's what we'll see them do. And a lot of guys don't see this happen because it happens behind the curtain. They'll go, crap, like I need that 5 pound box of Avitrol or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they won't charge a customer extra. They'll take care of those birds that are left or whatever, right? And they'll say, see, our solution worked. Like we
Yeah.
sold it to you, it's our solution. It's like that's
That's kind of scary because if something goes awry, the question is, did you have client permission to use a pesticide on their site? I
oh
mean,
yeah,
that is that's some scary stuff. So I
I
mean,
agree with it. Yep.
I'm just trying to think of how, because I think some states have notification laws.
Mhm.
So wow, yeah, whew, that would I don't doubt that that probably happened somewhere. I think
Oh no,
that's some
it's
scary
more
stuff.
common. It's more common, than it seems, and that's
Oh
simply
wow.
because again, you
Yeah.
just don't know. Like the thing is like if I come in again, I've got food, water, and harborage, right?
Right, right.
If I can't eliminate all of the French fries as well as take away the harborage, like I still have an enticing attract a target for birds.
Yeah.
if I can't take care of all of the water that happens as well as the harborage, I still have something that's very enticing for birds. So the truth is if I come in and I sell this and I go, okay, great, we're going to get these birds out of here for you. I don't actually know that they're going to leave. I don't know where they're going to shovel to, is the truth. I've really got my fingers crossed, hoping that they move from, again, position A, and that position B is somewhere across the street or across town or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the
And so
hope.
now, yeah, so now imagine, like, if I'm selling that contract and it's six figures, um,
Mm.
imagine the pressure that I'm under now, to create the thing that I said I was going to create, which was a bird-free zone.
Right.
And so I've seen a lot of companies panic, and rush to do something that's like, to me, the thing, again, where I was talking about ethics earlier, my problem with that is more, you express to the customer you were going to create this thing, and then you actually brought the solution to the table and told them that it was going to do this thing. And without being 100% sure that it's going to happen, you've got to express that. It's like, man, if you're 70% sure, I understand that it might be hard to sell a six-figure contract and tell them you're 70% sure it's going to take care of the problem, but you have to, ethically, you need to say that.
Yeah, I really agree more. You have to, without a doubt. Well, Sheldon, really glad to have you on board here, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk. Don't be a stranger. I do hope when
Yes,
you come
thank
out with
you.
some new products or new systems, I do hope you would think of Living the Wildlife podcast and come back. So
Yes, love to.
if you're just coming onto the show now, you've been listening to Sheldon Dillingham. He is the owner of Avitrol Corporation, avitrol.com. That's Avitrol.com, and we've been talking about sales and the use of Avitrol, the myths related to Avitrol, what Avitrol can do for you, the support that you can get from the company, and how it can fit into a larger business system. Those of you that don't have a pesticide license, I'm going to tell you, get your pesticide license by
Agreed.
hook or by crook. Get it somehow. Even if you never plan on using it, you may find that it's, as your bones start getting older, it might be something that's advantageous, but also gives you a little bit more job security. But if you're not, you have the ability to work with Avitrol and serve your client, even if you're not necessarily doing the work. And that sometimes can build you goodwill with a client as well, and they can work with you.
Absolutely.
A lot of support there. He's really brought this company. I'm glad he kept it going. There was a time there I was wondering if we were going to lose Avitrol, and I'm really glad that he was able to do that. And he's been kind enough also to send me some training material that's coming up pretty too. So I'm really grateful for that. Grateful
Absolutely.
for that. Well, again, everyone, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and if you can give us a 5-star review, we'd be grateful for that. Living the Wildlife is part of a program to help you with the technical side, the detailed side of vertebrate pest control. That's our vision and goal with this particular work. I'd love to get your comments. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, perhaps future shows. Perhaps you would like to be on the show. Definitely reach out. I would love to hear from you. Yes, even the criticism. We'll take that as well. Well, we call this living the wildlife. Why do we call it living the wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.